Former U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, was with me with breaking news on Friday. He's in focus with me today. We're going to dissect it moving forward. Now, what's next? Senior White House correspondent Peter Doocy now outside the White House. Peter.
And Harris, there's quite a disconnect happening here at the White House and with their allies in Kyiv, because I have been told by a senior official here that nothing's going to happen with this minerals deal until Zelenskyy goes in front of cameras and makes an explicit public apology for the way that he behaved in the Oval Office with that meeting. But Zelenskyy is out there now saying that he thinks he can still get this minerals deal without saying sorry.
We are not making any steps back. This is our policy, to be consistent regardless of what happened before. We are constructive. If we agree that it will be signed, from our side we are ready to sign. I honestly think the United States will be ready as well. Maybe they need time to analyze some things.
Yeah, well, good luck, because there is still a desire by Republicans in D.C. to end the war in Ukraine and to make a deal with Ukraine on the way forward. But after Friday's Oval Office dust-up, Republicans don't care if peace happens with Zelenskyy in charge or somebody else, although nobody is saying yet who they think a suitable Zelenskyy replacement could be.
Something has to change. Either he needs to come to his senses and come back to the table in gratitude, or someone else needs to lead the country to do that. I mean, it's up to the Ukrainians to figure that out. But I can tell you that we are re-exerting peace through strength.
And we're hearing now that President Trump plans to talk about the end of the war in Ukraine at some point tomorrow, one day closer to his self-imposed deadline to end the war within the first 100 days back in office. Harris?
All right, great reporting on you to get that nugget. I mean, they want an explicit apology from Zelenskyy. Have we seen anything to maybe point to that actually happening?
No, nothing. I've heard that Zelenskyy's team have been calling their counterparts here at the White House, but it just does not seem like anything is going to happen unless President Trump changes his mind and doesn't want a public apology. Nothing is going to happen. They are not going to get this deal, and they are basically going to be in the timeout chair with the way that the White House sees it until he comes up and says, I am sorry for the way that I acted.
Wow, the Ukrainian president literally taking it. Call a friend when you're losing. But this isn't a game show. Peter Doocy, thank you. Well, it turns out that President Trump is not the first president to lose patience with Zelenskyy. Seems former President Biden lost his temper too, and we know he had one. We saw it many times. A 2022 report has resurfaced since Friday's Oval Office meltdown, and it says, quote, Biden had barely finished telling Zelenskyy he'd just green-lighted another $1 billion in U.S. taxpayer military assistance for Ukraine when Zelenskyy started listing all the additional help he needed and was not getting. Biden lost his temper. The people familiar with that call said the American people were being quite generous, and his administration and the U.S. military were working hard to help Ukraine. He said raising his voice, and Zelenskyy could not show a little more gratitude. He could. Biden wanted him to apologize, and he wanted him to say thank you. That's a familiar theme. Let's talk to someone who knows. Gordon Sondland, former U.S. ambassador to the European Union under President Trump. Look, when you hear that, now it makes Friday make more sense to me. What about you?
Well, no one's been a bigger supporter of Ukraine or President Zelenskyy, but I've got to tell you, Harris, he's really miscalculated this one in a big way. President Trump is trying to give him something that's actually better in the long run than an Article 5 NATO guarantee.
That's
right. And
right.
that is billions of dollars of American investment and thousands of Americans in the country working with the Ukrainians, alongside the Ukrainians. The rare earth minerals are only the tip of the iceberg here. He's looking at a long-term major joint venture with the Ukrainians. And then he can look Putin in the eye and say, listen, the next time you take 1 inch of Ukraine, you're going to hurt an American. And now it's not a proxy war anymore. Now you're going directly against our interests, and you know what we'll do to you if you do that, which is a much better guarantee than this ephemeral NATO type of guarantee where you never know who's on first. It's also ironic that the Europeans lambasted Trump for kicking Zelenskyy out of the White House, but this morning I was on a BBC program, and they don't want to send British boys, as they call it, to the front lines to act as peacekeepers. So which way do they want to have it?
You know how they want it. They have always wanted us to pick up the bill, us to be the people who are on the front lines and in danger, us not to lead the way, to follow them, but to act like we like that. That's a lot. Do you think that we get an apology from the president of Ukraine? A public apology?
I think there needs to be a public apology, and I think President Trump needs to ask President Zelenskyy to apologize to the American people, not just to he and to the vice president personally. Because I think the American people, by having seen what the sausage making that normally goes on behind closed doors, having seen that same sausage making going on in front of dozens of media representatives, now understand what President Trump is up against here.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we saw it. Otherwise, we wouldn't know what was going on.
Exactly.
And this administration promised transparency, and boy, was it ever. Let's get to this. Mark Thiessen's Washington Post column is titled, "Zelenskyy Must Mend the Breach with Trump or Resign." He argues Zelenskyy's stubbornness has badly hurt Ukraine. Here's more from National Security Advisor Mike Waltz.
Both sides are going to have to make compromises. I think a lot of people can see what those roughly will be in terms of security guarantee for some type of territorial concessions. Those broad outlines are evident. Does both sides have the will to sit down and drive this towards peace? That's President Trump's objective.
Ambassador Sondland, tell us how it works. When someone walks away from the table, from a deal, should they expect to come back to that same deal, or is there a penalty for that?
Well, I've learned two things in business negotiation. I've had a similar career to President Trump, maybe not as illustrious, but I know that 99% of the movement in a deal happens in the last 1% of the time available, and we're kind of there now. So I fully expect there is a lot going on behind the scenes between subordinates, whether that's between Secretary Rubio and the foreign minister, or whether it's between Steve Witkoff and President Zelenskyy. But there's a lot of talking going on right now, and I think that now a apology has to be curated. I believe that President Zelenskyy thought when he left Ukraine and flew to Washington, he thought he could either schmooze Trump into including security guarantees, or if that failed, bully him into, or embarrass him, I guess, into including security guarantees by showing those awful pictures, of dead Ukrainians in the Oval Office. And of course, neither of those worked, and he should have read the room better.
Yeah, real quickly, an opinion piece says Democrats led Zelenskyy and Ukraine off a cliff with pressure to reject the mineral deal. And it talks about a Friday tweet, or post, we should say, on X, from Democratic Senator Chris Murphy. It was posted right after his meeting with Zelenskyy and right before President Trump's. And it said, just finished a meeting with the president, Zelenskyy, here in Washington. He confirmed that the Ukrainian people will not support a fake peace agreement where Putin gets everything he wants and there are no security arrangements for Ukraine. I can tell you, everybody read that. I want to know how you take it in terms of the negotiations.
Well, first of all, it's completely an insult. I thought that, politics stops at the water's edge. And this was an opportunity for the Democrats, albeit reluctantly, to support President Trump. Because what President Trump is doing is he is putting Putin in a very difficult position. They just don't see how to connect the dots. And
Right.
I think for Murphy to say something like that, particularly given his position, is shameful.
Ambassador, it is always great to have you with your expertise. Thank you so very much and your time.